Welcome to the Miller Report, Real Clear Journalism. I'm Maggie Miller. Today we're looking at Ben Weingarten's latest investigation. A new fight is brewing in Washington, and it's over who gets counted in America's official population. The U.S. Census, taken every 10 years, isn't just a head count. It determines how many seats each state gets in the House of Representatives, how many Electoral College votes it holds, and where trillions in federal dollars flow. Now, after years of surging illegal immigration, the Trump administration is signaling that it will again try to change the long-standing rule, counting illegal aliens in the census. It's a move that could reshape political power nationwide. President Trump first pushed for this change during his first term. President Biden quickly reversed it. But with support from red state attorney generals and GOP lawmakers, Trump's second administration appears determined to try again. Critics say counting illegal immigrants unfairly boosts states with large non-citizen populations, often blue states like California and New York. One study found that if non-citizens had been excluded from the 2010 census, states like Ohio, Missouri, and Montana would have gained House seats, while California would have lost 3. Supporters of the current practice say it's rooted in history. Since the first census in 1790, the count has included all residents, not just citizens. They argue that states should be able to represent everyone who lives there, regardless of immigration status. But Republicans pushing for the change say it's about fairness, that representation should reflect we the people, the citizens, not those in the country illegally. And they point to the 14th Amendment, which refers to apportioning by the whole number of persons, a phrase that is now under renewed legal scrutiny. A lawsuit by several red states is already underway, and in Congress, House Republicans have reintroduced the Equal Representation Act, which would exclude non-citizens from the apportionment count. The bill passed the House but stalled in the Senate. This fight over who counts isn't just academic, it could decide political power in America for the next decade. We're joined now by the lead investigator on the story, Ben Weingarten. Ben, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get to the crux of the discussion. Does counting everyone, regardless of legal status, reflect the American ideal of equal representation, or does it dilute the voice of legal citizens?
That is the question that really drives this debate on both sides about something that seems arcane and in the weeds, but is actually hugely consequential, which is, in our census count, who ought to be counted? Everyone who's in the country, residing in the country at a given time? Or should it be only citizens, those who are eligible to vote and or their children and others who are Americans? And why is this question so pivotal? Because the census count is used to apportion seats in Congress, which is to say, so hugely significant when it comes to the balance of power, especially in a divided House like the one we've frequently had in recent years that hinges on a very small margin for the majority. Then obviously as well, the apportionment flows through to the Electoral College, how many votes for president each state gets. And then last but not least, also very significant, hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars in federal funds are allocated down to the states based on the population counts generated by the decennial census. So these numbers basically have massive sway over political power and influence in this country and representation. And we see a scenario where in some cases, American citizens have their political power essentially diluted, and you have other people who have disproportionate political power because they have a substantial number or percentage of non-citizens, including illegal aliens, within their districts.
It kind of seems like both sides are coming to the table, with their own interpretations of certain things from the past in order to back it up and say why this should be the case or why it shouldn't be the case. Obviously, there was discussion about the 14th Amendment. So what is your interpretation of what both sides are bringing to the table, as well as, how much do you think those will hold sway as we continue this discussion?
So on the side of the status quo, which is count everyone normally residing, so-called, within the states, essentially the strength of the status quo argument is this is the way it's been for multiple hundred years. You've had the Supreme Court say in a majority opinion that there are people who get representation even if they're not able to vote. And on their plain reading of the Constitution and then of law later on, they say numbers. It doesn't say solely U.S. citizens, etc. Now, the counter of this, and this is argued by some constitutional scholars on the right, including John Eastman of the Claremont Institute for these matters before, he will say, and others will say, are a people, and that people is American citizens, not non-citizens and not illegal aliens. And beyond that, of course, when the Constitution was framed and drafted, you did not have millions of illegal aliens having entered the country in the immediate run-up to that period, nor necessarily is there potentially any kind of historical parallel, certainly in U.S. history, to what's transpired really over the last 4 years and more broadly over the last several decades. So you've had a massive influx on a percentage basis of people who are not citizens into the country present at the founding, subsequent to the founding, and certainly when there's been subsequent law written about apportioning House seats. And so the counter on that side, look, the Constitution applies to a people, the American people, and they will raise hypotheticals like, for example, if the Olympic Games were held in a certain state, Summer Olympics one year, and hundreds of thousands of non-citizens came there and camped out for a couple months, and the census was conducted at that time, should you count those individuals? And those are the sorts of hypotheticals that are raised. You could also look at some other extreme hypotheticals, like if you had a House district and there were, say, 350,000 illegal aliens residing in an area and 150,000 American citizens, should that count the same as another district that has 500,000 American citizens? So there are all of these debates about the original meaning of the language, who it applies to, and then also there are constitutional and legal questions about who would have the authority to say we are going to only count citizens with respect to apportionment. Is that something that an executive can do himself? Is that something that needs to be done through statute, or do you need a constitutional amendment potentially? So these issues have risen close to the Supreme Court. There has been litigation that's risen to the Supreme Court regarding, can you draw a district, or do districts have to only encompass those who are voting eligible, which of course it includes U.S. citizens. The court has said they do not have to be drafted that way, which means you can include non-citizens in the count, but it hasn't spoken affirmatively of, is there a constitutional or a legal interpretation one way or the other on this? And then again, who has the authority to make this call? The Supreme Court during the first Trump administration had the question brought before them about, can you exclude non-citizens from the census count for apportionment purposes? And the Supreme Court punted on the question. They said there was not standing, and basically the issue was mooted ultimately. So now it appears set to come to the fore again. You've had a senior White House official, Stephen Miller, who said that the administration is going to do everything it can to exclude non-citizens from the census. And then there's a timing issue here to boot, one further nuance, which is that the questions the administration intends to ask on the census are to be submitted to Congress during this term of the Trump presidency in, I believe, 2028. However, the census will be executed after Donald Trump, the second Trump term, is out of office. So who will be in office then, and how will they execute it?
That's very interesting. It's like the path forward for the Trump administration to maybe even have success in this. It's like, first off, it's going to be a long time, I feel like, before we understand it. And I think it does seem to come down a lot to the Supreme Court and whatever decision they end up making, correct?
That's right. And whether it comes from the states pushing their interpretation of the law, whether you have legislation that passes the House and the Senate and then is signed, or whether it's through executive action, any or all of those are probably going to ultimately end up with this question before the Supreme Court about who should count.
So, in your piece, you discussed the residency rule that was supposed to be updated this month. What update, if any, have we seen on it? And are we? Is there any way to bring this conversation to the present? What have you seen since you wrote your article?
Right. So there was litigation filed by several states right before Inauguration Day. I think it was January 17th of this year, where the states challenged this residency rule, which says you have to count people in the census at their place of residence, irrespective of their citizenship. And they challenged it, the states challenged it, largely Republican dominated states, on a number of grounds, and they want the courts to say the non-citizens shouldn't be counted, that this residency rule ought to be revoked or modified substantially, and then in the next census there ought to be a question about citizenship that can be used to exclude non-citizens from the count. So obviously, 3 days after this suit was filed, then you had a new administration come in with new leadership in the Commerce Department. And then, of course, the Census Bureau sits under the Commerce Department. And that's where all of the critical in the weeds decisions here are going to be made, even though the president admits the enforcement purposes. So the states have gone back and forth. According to court filings, they have conferred with the administration. Both sides said, basically, let's stay the litigation right now while the new administration works through its policy. There was a joint status update in early July, and the status update essentially was the parties are still talking. So we don't know yet where the administration is going to come out on this, but if their posture is consistent with what's been articulated by Stephen Miller, then really the question is going to be, are they going to ask a citizenship question, reinstate a citizenship question on the census? There were questions about citizenship included in the census up until 1960. And it's also worth noting that there is a survey that the Census Bureau runs more frequently, not on a sample size of the whole population of America, but on a percentage of the population. It's called the American Community Survey. And that survey does have a question on citizenship as well. The first Trump administration, should be noted, wanted to reinstate the citizenship question, and they were fought furiously in the courts. The question of whether they could reinstate the citizenship question, essentially, are you a citizen of the United States, on the census, went before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, yes, the administration can reinstate that question in the census, but the court dinged the first Trump administration for the process they used to justify reincorporating the question. So again, we'll see if we have reinstatement of that question this time around, if there's again challenges to it, if again it goes to the Supreme Court. So there are multiple layers to the legal fight here and the political fight as well. But the bottom line point is that all of this push from the administration likely to come is consistent with its view that essentially America is for Americans, and that you have to reduce the illegal alien population, and that you have to reduce, in the administration's view, untoward, undue foreign influence on our political system by way of counting non-citizens in the census.
It sounds like it's going to be months, if not years, before we find out exactly how this is going to play out. Is there anything you would like to leave people with?
This is a hugely consequential question. It's in the weeds. It's arcane. It came to my attention during the first Trump administration when former Attorney General under Barack Obama, Eric Holder, was hugely focused on this idea of counting non-citizens in the census and challenging the administration's posture on it. Oftentimes, it's these very nuanced and arcane, sometimes technical issues that have outsized massive political sway. And while these questions are going to be litigated probably in the years ahead, they loom over our system, irrespective, essentially, of what happens in immigration policy, whether it's a massive reduction in illegal alien encounters and crossings at the borders, whether or if there is substantial deportation here. There's still the matter of those residing in this country and whether they will have influence over the balance of political power, including over the presidency, depending upon this census count. So it's in the weeds and it's arcane and it's a long-term issue, but it does loom over our political system. And it could be the difference between who is a majority in the House and who the next president is. So, or two presidents down. So massively critical question. And we wanted to address it early on before the battle unfolds.
No, it'll be great to, have this conversation now and maybe have it down the line as things progress. Well, Ben, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That was it for the Miller Report, Real Clear Journalism. I'm Maggie Miller. I'll see you next time.